Hey friends, tonight we're traveling far back in time to the riverbanks of the Nile, to a land remembered for towering pyramids, mighty rulers and deities believed to observe every step you took. But if you peel away the glittering masks and monumental temples, the reality becomes far more severe. So let's wonder together, what if you had to spend just a single day in ancient Egypt? Because believe me, the sun isn't the only thing that could scorch you beyond comfort. Before you settle in, take a quick second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly find value in these journeys I share. And I'd love to hear in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's always intriguing to see this community gathering from every corner of the world. Now, lower the lights. Maybe let a fan run quietly in the background, giving that soft hum, and ease yourself into tonight's story. Welcome to Egypt of old, a land of monumental pyramids, ever-present gods, and relentless beams of sunlight. Even before your eyelids lift, the blazing heat pours through your humble reed hut, as if the heavens themselves have chosen to remind you who's in charge. There are no drapes, no shutters, and certainly no cool breeze from an air conditioner. Just the stark, inescapable heat of the desert, baking everything it touches, including you, before the day even begins. You're stretched out on a straw mat with only a thin linen cover that feels more like a suggestion than a shield. Those calming Nile breezes you've seen in travel documentaries, they've long since vanished. Maybe they disappeared around 2,800 years before the Common Era. By the time you stagger outside, the temperature is already climbing close to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, about 32 Celsius, and the morning is barely underway. In this place, the sun doesn't merely shine, it wages war against your thin linen clothing. That tunic might as well be a scrap of tissue inside a steam bath, and forget about sunscreen. There is no soothing aloe, no bottles labeled with high SPF, not even a floppy hat from a souvenir stall. The Egyptians did use oils to protect themselves, but unless you're wealthy or serve in the temple, those won't reach you. Your best chance, smearing mud or even crocodile droppings over your skin with the faint hope it prevents you from sizzling. The emphasis is on faint. By the middle of the day, the ground beneath your feet is hot enough to cook lentils. Shade isn't just scarce, it's a treasure. Trees are uncommon, and even hiding behind a mud brick wall barely helps, because even that wall feels like it's perspiring. You meanwhile resemble bread shoved into a clay oven left to bake far too long. And complaining is not wise. Ra, the mighty sun god, is watching. Here the heat is not merely climate, it is the physical presence of divine power. A blistering day means Ra is in full command. So when you feel yourself melting, it's interpreted as a divine sign of strength. Surviving even one morning here demands constant water humility and the ability to tolerate life as a walking roast. And this is only the beginning. You finally roll yourself off that scratchy mat and begin your day. The bright side is the Nile is only a short distance away. The not so bright side is you smell it long before you arrive. This great river, the source of all life here, sacred and revered, the reason for Egypt's very existence. But honesty requires admitting that it often smells like a fish market that has been left too long beside a swamp. Along the edges you'll hear the constant hum of flies, the croaking of frogs, and notice unsettling creatures with more legs than you'd prefer. And yet this is where you must wash. Soap isn't available, and even if it were, your purse wouldn't cover it. Instead, the trusted cleanser of the day is sand. Yes, sand. Exfoliation Egyptian style. You rub yourself with coarse grains and call it cleansing. It works somewhat like nature's sandpaper, though less effective than you'd hope. Your clothes too are washed here, which really means pounding them against rocks and hoping that a lurking crocodile doesn't confuse your tunic for its next meal. And to make matters more complicated, sewage sometimes drifts down from upstream. Remember, this river is shared by people, by animals, and even by boats carrying the departed. Yet somehow this is considered fresh and clean. You scrub, you rinse, and step out feeling a bit less sticky, though slightly more worried about parasites. If you live in a larger city such as Memphis or Thebes, you might be fortunate enough to access a public basin or a cistern, but for the majority the Nile is the only option. Privacy isn't part of the deal either. Families, neighbours, livestock and wandering birds all share this bathing ground, the ibis pecking near your ankles as if it belongs there. Water jars are filled balanced on heads and carried back to your small brick house before the afternoon sun bakes the clay. This ritual is daily spiritual essential and at times unnerving. Yes, the Nile is sacred. It sustains you, cleans you and gives you water to live. But it is no pristine oasis. In truth, it is both wonder and hazard, a blessing and a threat, but it's all there is. By now you've waded in crocodile waters, scraped your skin with sand and stand feeling like a baked fruit. Which means it's time for breakfast, the least glamorous yet most vital meal you'll have here. Set your hopes realistically. There are no poached eggs, no colourful fruit plates and absolutely no iced coffees. Breakfast in this age isn't an indulgence, it's a refueling stop. You sit low, maybe on a small stool if you own one, or simply squat in the corner as most do. The centerpiece is bread, and more bread, heavy, coarse, and often as tough as worn leather. It's made from emmer wheat or barley, baked in clay ovens that rats may also consider theirs. And don't be surprised if each loaf holds a crunch of sand. Not added by choice, but carried in by the grinding stones themselves. Consider it a daily serving of minerals. After the bread comes beer, but not the sparkling kind you might imagine. This brew is thick, cloudy, and lukewarm, closer to a porridge than a pint. It's heavy with calories faintly fermented like a liquid grain mush with the sourness of cereal left too long. Even the children drink it. Not for daring, but because it's safer than river water. At least the brewing process kills off some of the parasites, unlike the Nile we just described as a floating laboratory of life. If fortune smiles, you may add an onion or a few dried dates to the meal. Protein appears only if someone managed to catch a fish and resisted eating it right away. So you chew your dense loaf and sip your murky beer while flies circle like honoured guests at their feast. You wave at them with one hand, hold your cup with the other, and accept that this is as good as it gets today. Breakfast here is not about taste, but about fuel. It gives you just enough energy to last until another sand-laced piece of bread arrives. There you have it, gritty bread and chunky beer and enough strength to begin your day, and that means it's time for labour. And let me assure you, labour in ancient Egypt makes modern exhaustion seem like a gentle retreat. Unless you're a priest, a scribe or a noble, which you almost certainly are not, your work is entirely physical. No climate control, no coffee pauses, no padded chairs, only dust, sweat and the looming risk of collapse before midday. If you farm, you are knee-deep in river mud by sunrise, tugging weeds or planting grain under the gaze of an overseer whose main occupation is shouting. Your tools are wooden ploughs, rough sickles and your bare hands. If your back throbs, that's proof you're doing it right. If you labour elsewhere, matters grow even harsher. Picture dragging stones weighing tons for temple walls while barefoot under the fire of the sun up ramps made of rubble and hope. A wrong step means a broken ankle and nothing more than a shrug from your supervisor. If you're in tomb construction, the effort is relentless. You carve into limestone shaping chambers for the dead who will rest far more peacefully than you ever will. And a mistake while preparing a pharaoh's tomb that could end with your own fate sealed inside those walls with a curse for company. Women too are not spared. Their work is also grueling, grinding grain, hauling water, weaving linen, raising children while also labouring in the fields. A pause comes only if a child naps for a few short minutes. Meals are prepared on the move. Sweat is wiped with a sleeve. Tasks never pause because stopping means falling behind, and falling behind means losing your share of grain, leaving you with nothing. There is no official ending time. The sun itself is your timekeeper. When it finally disappears, you drag yourself home weary, covered in dust, wishing for softer sandals and a gentler God. Work here is not just difficult, it is never-ending. It consumes your body day after day until either you collapse or your overseer deems you no longer worth feeding. And worse still, after such grinding labour you might feel tempted to mutter a complaint. Something small perhaps, this task is unbearable, or why must I endure this? But stop, Because in this world, complaint isn't just impolite, it can be considered dangerous. Why? Because your ruler isn't just a leader. He is a god in human form. The pharaoh was not merely born to power or chosen by luck. He is regarded as the living embodiment of Horus, child of Ra, chosen by the heavens to maintain Ma'at, the sacred balance of the universe. Which means if the river's waters rise well this year, you thank the pharaoh. If they do not, perhaps your devotion fell short. To doubt his power is not only disrespectful, it borders on sacrilege. Speaking against him could earn you a date with lashes, iron chains, or an early journey to the afterlife without any of the burial goods you might have wanted to take along. His likeness appears everywhere on towering statues etched into temple walls, pressed onto coins, even imprinted on molds used for baking bread. His name echoes constantly in rituals, his image drawn larger than anyone else's in every mural you see. That isn't exaggeration for effect. It's mandated, and don't imagine you'll ever come close to meeting him. If you're just an ordinary person, the best you'll manage is catching a glimpse of a golden bark drifting past during a festival procession. Blink once and it's gone, carrying him back to a palace you'll never set foot in, protected by guards, surrounded by officials and scribes, and guarded by enough gold to fund an entire kingdom. Which, fun fact, is exactly what he does. If by chance you end up assigned to work on a royal project, a tomb, a temple, or carving out a statue taller than a building you serve with so-called joy, at least that's the official line, you repeat it too, because pretending to be proud of chiseling stone for 14 hours each day is far safer than voicing the truth. And don't even allow the thought of rebellion to slip into your mind. Pharaohs extinguish uprisings faster than you can pronounce the word dynasty. Think of the last community that refused its taxes. Actually, you can't. It no longer exists. So yes, the pharaoh is seen as divine, and you're fortunate simply to be permitted to sweat in his service. Now back to your labor. If you thought enduring the blazing sun was your greatest challenge, wait until you realize that here sand is more than scenery. It's your roommate, your companion at meals, your daily irritant, and your unshakable adversary. It creeps into your clothing, fills your bedding, and sprinkles itself into your meals. There's no possible escape. You might be working, offering prayers, sleeping, or simply buying food in the market when a sudden gust arrives, leaving your face freshly scoured in an exfoliation treatment you never wanted. Start with your clothing. You wear linen. It's light and airy, but about as useful at blocking sand as a net would be at holding water. Grains sift down inside your tunic, stick to your skin, and somehow end up in places you didn't know fabric even touched. And eating, forget it. Every loaf of bread doubles as a sand trap. Flour is ground on stone slabs, which means fragments of grit slip right into the dough. Egyptians weren't just eating their crops, they were consuming bits of the millstones too. That's why ancient skulls often show teeth worn flat as pebbles in a river. Imagine chewing your breakfast while filing your molars down daily. And if you think your home is any safer from sand, think again. Your mud brick house has gaps, tiny cracks, and window openings without glass. Each is a perfect door for sand whipped in by the wind. Your floor gathers layers of it, your cooking jars are full of it. Your bed is little more than a disguised sandbox. Shoes are an afterthought at best. Most people walk barefoot, which means your feet are constantly being worn into the texture of weathered leather. If you do happen to own footwear, it's usually a simple pair of reed sandals. Fashionable enough, perhaps, but protective. Not really. And then there are the sandstorms, Egypt's way of being slapped by the elements. They're sudden, spinning and blinding. One moment you're talking to a neighbor, the next you're choking on dust, eyes stinging as if someone poured an entire shoreline directly into them. The world vanishes into a haze, and everyone around you is reduced to vague, coughing shapes. In the end, sand isn't just the backdrop of your world. It becomes part of you. It enters your eyes, clogs your lungs, irritates your skin, and bruises your dignity. It weaves itself into your existence until it feels like it's in your very bones. And no, you can't wash it away. You already tried in the Nile, which itself is likely filled with sand anyway. In this land, religion is not a pastime. It's the framework of everything. Your labor, your food, your cleanliness, even your nightly rituals are all shaped by gods with very specific demands. First lesson: they are everywhere. Your town brims with temples, each devoted to a different deity tasked with an essential role. Ra steers the sun across the sky as though piloting a celestial boat. Thoth, with the head of an ibis, oversees scribes' writing and lunar calendars. Sobek, part crocodile, part nightmare, watches the Nile. And Bastet, the cat goddess, manages charm and protection like a divine diplomat. Forget about independence. Your daily routine revolves around appeasing them. You wake, thank Ra, pour a splash of beer, say sorry to Hathor, stub your toe and bite back curses because a careless word could attract a spiteful spirit. Before eating, you give the gods a portion of your food. Before sleeping, you whisper a plea that Set, Lord of Chaos, doesn't plunge your house into disorder before dawn. Even death is not simple here. Funerals stretch across days, with the departed expected to overcome tests, avoid hostile demons and prove a life lived with decency or risk complete erasure. And speaking of the afterlife, it's taken with utmost seriousness. Dying is only the start. You undergo judgment with your heart weighed against the feather of truth. If your heart proves heavier, burdened with dishonesty or cruelty or perhaps the theft of a goat, you're devoured by Amit, a beast with crocodile head, lion's body and hippopotamus hindquarters. Which means even in death you're still under scrutiny. But here's the important part. This elaborate faith isn't seen as bleak. It provides reassurance. Egyptians believed their lives fit into a great cosmic balance. By honoring rituals and keeping the principle of truth and order, you might win an eternity of peace with food, family, and perhaps a boat to sail forever. Of course, wealth played a role. The richer you were, the more attention the gods seemed to offer. Temples were vast, priests held great influence, and common folk simply prayed that fortune would smile their way. Because here, faith isn't optional. It's your work contract, your insurance, and your ticket for the next world. So now perhaps you've stepped on something sharp, been bitten by a strange insect, or caught a fever, which in this place is basically any random Tuesday. That means it's time for medical attention. Don't picture a waiting room or antiseptic conditions. Instead, you'll be treated with a mix of herbs, incantations, and a great deal of hope. You'll be taken to a physician, and credit where it's due, they were some of the most skilled of the ancient world. They had scalpels, medical papyri, and solid anatomical knowledge. But here's the caveat: medicine was inseparable from magic. You're handed a salve made of honey, moldy bread, and crushed herbs. Oddly enough, honey does fight bacteria, and mold carries early penicillin-like qualities, so it partly works. But before applying it, the healer murmurs protective spells, just in case your stomach pains were the work of a malevolent ghost. A headache, perhaps crushed onions rubbed into your scalp accompanied by a chant to Thoth, persistent cough, a paste of cow dung and dates smeared on your chest with fingers crossed. Eye infection, you'll receive a poultice of lizard, blood ochre and beer paired with prayers to Horus. Surgical procedures did occur. Abscesses were opened, bones were aligned, and wounds were sewn using linen thread, but there was no anesthesia. Only a sharp tool and a friend gripping your arms while you screamed into a pillow of clay. As for dentistry, well, remember all that sand in the bread. By your 20s, your teeth are worn flat. If one becomes infected, your options are to live with the agony, risk death from it, or let someone yank it out with crude pliers fashioned by a smith of questionable talent. And always there are charms and amulets. Whether you're giving birth, being stitched, or sneezing too often, a good healer priest will tie a protective trinket around your neck. Because maybe the true problem is an unseen serpent spirit wrapped around your organs. So yes, Egyptian medicine had bright spots, but most of the time you placed faith in gods because your bandage was literally a prayer. Now here's a twist many don't expect. Women in Egypt held rights that wouldn't appear again for centuries elsewhere. They could own land, run shops, initiate divorce, even take men to court. It sounds strikingly modern. But before you imagine this as a time-travel dream of empowerment, pause. Because while the laws might sound advanced, daily reality was less inspiring. A woman's morning began well before the sun. You'd grind grain by hand bent over massive stone slabs that wore out both the kernels and your spine. Then off you went to carry water from the Nile, prepare meals, care for children, tend the house, feed animals, and when needed, labor in the fields too. You were a workforce condensed into one linen-clad body. There was no personal time, no day of leisure, no maternity leave. Childbirth was perilous and agonizing. Midwives could help, certainly, but there were no pain relievers, no disinfectants, and no soothing music to accompany you. You give birth in a stifling room thick with incense, whispered prayers, and the hope that blood loss will not claim you. Now let's shift to clothing and style. Linen dresses are airy and breathable, but there are no undergarments and rarely any shoes. The blazing sun burns your skin grains of sand grind into every fold, and insects treat you like their endless buffet. Cosmetics. They exist, certainly. Egyptian women used them widely, but much of it contained lead, applied with slim sticks that looked alarmingly similar to toothpicks. If fortune smiles and you're born into a wealthy household, life improves. You might be able to read and write, oversee accounts on estates, or even hold the respected role of a priestess. If you're royal, the door opens further. You could rule as pharaoh as Hatshepsut once did, or like Cleopatra, remembered for brilliance and striking makeup that inspired awe. But for poor women, the legal rights written on papyrus mean little compared to the grind of reality. Your days are consumed with work, sweat, bending, carrying, birthing, mourning, and prayer. You're not shackled by statutes, but by the necessity of survival. Still, Egyptian women had agency, and that was significant. They could stand before judges, inherit land, and marriage did not turn them into property. Compared to much of the ancient world, this was extraordinary. So yes, women here possessed rights, but comfort was reserved for statues and deities, not for the woman wrist-deep in dough while brushing flies away from a restless child. You've now made it through another punishing day in Egypt. You ate coarse bread full of grit, lugged heavy jars, tried to avoid angering the gods, and maybe even dodged a sandstorm. Surely now you can rest, but not yet. Because in this land, your greatest trial starts only once you die. Death here is not an ending. It's the beginning of a bureaucratic, multi-stage trek through the underworld. And if you thought your overseer was severe, wait until you face the divine judges. First, your spirit arrives in the hall of Ma'at. Before a panel of 42 gods, you must declare your innocence. It is the earliest form of legal testimony. You recite phrases like, "I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not covet another's donkey," all while praying the gods believe you. Next comes the weighing of the heart. Your heart, thought to carry the soul, is placed on scales against the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth, balance, and justice. If your heart outweighs the feather, it means you lived with sin. Enter Amit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, entirely terrifying. She doesn't fine you, she doesn't imprison you, she consumes your soul, completely erasing you from existence. No eternal life, no second chance, only nothingness. In a culture that treasured eternity, that was the most dreaded fate of all. And it's not only actions that matter. Words alone can undo you. A single mistake during confession, a forgotten line in the ritual, and your essence is destroyed. It's like sitting an open book exam where failure means being swallowed by a nightmare creature. Should you succeed, however, you are welcomed into the field of reeds, a perfected vision of Egypt, where your soul enjoys boats, harvests, family, and blissful rest under the sun, hopefully without swarms of biting insects. The stakes are monumental. That's why Egyptians poured such devotion into tomb building, funeral ceremonies, and sacred writings such as the Book of the Dead, a spiritual manual packed with spells, prayers, and practical tips like avoiding insults toward crocodile deities. The afterlife could indeed be beautiful, but only if you lived with care. One curse muttered, one tax unpaid, and your next destination might be Amit's jaws. Now let's return to daily life. If there is one small mercy, it's linen. Blessed, airy linen. Every garment yours and everyone else's is made from this plant fiber. It's cool, breathable, and the only true relief from the unrelenting heat. That's the upside. The downside, that's where comfort ends. Whether you're tilling fields, building monuments, selling goods, or leading rituals, your attire is nearly identical. Men wear short white kilts or simple loincloths. Women don straight linen gowns, sometimes with straps, sometimes without. If you're wealthy, you may have pleats, beaded adornments, or decorative patterns. If not, your dress is plain white or greyish if it's been too long since laundry day. And speaking of laundry, picture scrubbing clothes by hand in the Nile, hoping a hippo doesn't rise mid-wash. Most go barefoot. Sandals woven from reeds or leather are saved for ceremonies or the feet of priests. Unless you belong to the elite, your toes live pressed into burning sand, often sliced by sharp stones. Accessories exist, yes, but their purpose is mostly protection. Amulets ward off danger, necklaces, signal rank, and kohl eyeliner, made from powdered minerals, serves not just style but function, shielding eyes from glare and believed to guard against disease. Indeed, even makeup served a role. But no amount of cosmetics protects you from insects. Flies, gnats, and mosquitoes are relentless. They treat your airy dress as an open invitation. You spend your day swatting, rubbing perfumed oils on your skin and hoping your linen doesn't cling to you like wet cloth under the punishing sun. And don't expect a winter wardrobe. Egypt has no real winter, just hot and slightly less hot. Linen becomes your permanent uniform, whether it's 110 degrees or a cooler 70 in the evening. So while Egyptian clothing was simple, elegant, and far kinder than what Romans would later endure, don't be fooled. However light your attire feels, your days remain heavy with toil, heat, and pests that never respect your space. Another blistering day ends with you staggering home, your linen clinging sand, grating, and patience worn thin. But survival here is fleeting, because no matter your resilience, odds are you won't live beyond 35. Let's examine why. First, reaching adulthood itself is rare. Infant mortality is high. If you survive, you are considered grown by 13, already married, already at work, already raising children. Why? Because time is short. You might fall to sunstroke infection, childbirth, crocodiles, scorpions, or bread that ruins your teeth. And remember, antibiotics don't exist. If a fever takes hold, your only remedies are honey, herbs, and prayers that the gods show mercy. Yet here is the surprising part: Egyptians did not cower from death. They embraced it. They planned for it more carefully than many today plan for retirement. If wealthy, you prepare a tomb, the ancient equivalent of a luxury eternal suite. You accumulate grave goods, jewels, food offerings, perfumes, statues, and shaptis, tiny servant figures destined to labor for you in the next life. Think of them as everlasting assistants working while you rest forever. Your body is embalmed, salted with natron, wrapped in linen, and placed within a painted sarcophagus. You're buried alongside the Book of the Dead, which reads less like doom and more like a mystical travel guide. It contains passwords, protective spells, and instructions on how not to be devoured by monsters. If poor, your burial is humbler. A shallow grave in the sand wrapped in scraps of cloth, maybe with a pot or two set beside you before earth covers you. No golden mask, no painted chamber, only the desert wind. Still, even the poorest held tight to the dream of the afterlife, a paradise in the field of reeds where you till crops without sweat, eat without hunger, and sail endlessly beneath gentle skies. So yes, life expectancy was short in Egypt, but if you lived righteously, prayed faithfully, and avoided insulting too many jackal-headed deities, eternity could still be generous. At last you've reached the tomb, your body embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Time to rest in peace. Not quite, because in Egypt even the dead are not safe. Tombs overflow with treasure, amulets of gold, jewelry, fragrant oils, carved statues, chests filled with fine linens, and for pharaohs entire ships of wealth. All intended for the journey into eternity, but to the living, a tomb heavy with riches was an irresistible target for theft. Robbery was so widespread it became a constant threat. Pharaohs attempted to deter it by hiding tombs deep within cliffs, sealing entrances with stone, and inscribing menacing curses on the walls. Threats like "May a crocodile consume your soul," or "May fiery serpents twist your limbs forever." But here's the truth: the curses almost never worked. Grave robbers still came under cover of darkness, guided by secret knowledge. Sometimes they were villagers nearby. Other times they were laborers who had helped build the very tombs they later plundered. Even priests and guards, men sworn to protect the sacred dead, were occasionally complicit. And if they were caught, the penalties were brutal: public lashings, mutilation, exile, or a swift execution. But with treasures like gold ornaments, perfumed oils, and rare incense packed inside, the risk often seemed worth it. After all, the dead could not resist. And it wasn't only the mighty who lost their afterlife comforts. The graves of ordinary people were also disturbed. A poor farmer might have been buried with just a jug of beer or a loaf of bread for his journey beyond. That too was tempting. Food was precious. Tools were useful. Linen was a form of currency. In those moments, robbing a tomb wasn't just about greed, it could be about staying alive. During famines, civil unrest, or foreign invasions, a starving man might break into a grave not for gold but for food to keep his children alive. When hunger gnawed at families, offerings once seen as sacred could look very much like dinner. In this way, Egypt proved that even in death, safety was never assured. Your resting place could be violated, your memory wiped, your body unwrapped by desperate hands wielding a chisel. True peace only came if no one knew where you lay. And yet when we think of Egypt, we don't first think of theft. We imagine those mesmerizing carvings on tomb and temple walls: birds, eyes, serpents, lotus flowers, men striding sideways as though on a catwalk, hieroglyphs dazzling, intricate, and notoriously hard to learn. They are beautiful, but reading them is another matter. Hieroglyphs weren't simply decoration, they formed a sophisticated writing system of more than 700 characters, a number that grew over time. Some signs represented entire words. Others stood for sounds. Many acted as determinatives, clarifying meaning, since a star drawn as a star alone was apparently not clear enough. Forget about spaces or punctuation. Egyptian writing ran on as one continuous string of elegant riddles filled with artistry, stripped of vowels and heavy with context. To complicate things, text could run left to right, right to left, or vertically. The way to read it: look to the animals or human figures. They always face the start of the line. If they look right, you read right. If they look left, read left. If they're upside down, well, good luck. This was never intended for everyone. Ordinary Egyptians weren't expected to read or write. Literacy likely touched only about 1% of the population. To join that rare group, you had to become a scribe, beginning as a boy, spending years hunched over papyrus. You memorized hundreds of signs, copied scrolls endlessly, and wrote so much your hand likely twisted into a permanent claw by adolescence. But the reward was extraordinary. Scribes lived with respect, steady food, and relief from heavy manual labor. While others sweated in fields or hauled stone, you inked records, managed court proceedings, kept letters, and copied sacred texts. Writing was power, and those who held the reed brush held authority in silence. For most, though, writing was mystical. Hieroglyphs were infused with spiritual force. To inscribe a name preserved the soul forever. To erase one destroyed a person's spiritual existence entirely. Spelling errors then carried a weight unimaginable today. So while hieroglyphs might look like ancient emoji to modern eyes, they were more like a sacred puzzle wrapped in myth, mathematics, and magic. Beautiful, yes. Simple, never. So after walking through 14 chapters of heat, hunger, sand, superstition, and unrelenting toil, it's time for the question: could you survive one day here? Let's be honest. The answer is probably no. The ancient world is easy to romanticize: golden tombs, the fragrance of lotus, exquisite art gods with animal heads, a love for order and beauty. But behind every monument stood harsh truths that spared almost no one but the elite. The average Egyptian day began on a dirt floor surrounded by flies, with the knowledge that if you failed to work, you failed to eat. You walked barefoot on scorching ground, carried water, cooked over open flames, lived packed into spaces with animals and smoke. You feared disease, divine anger, and the chance of a snake slithering into your bed. No toothpaste, no proper medicine, no retirement. If you were lucky, you owned 2 sets of clothing. You lived under a ruler worshipped as a god in a climate that baked your body within a religion that required you to pass a literal divine courtroom after death before earning peace. And let's not forget the things missing from your life: antibiotics, sunscreen, privacy, plumbing, anesthesia, or any escape from the station you were born into. There was no climbing out of your role. You were either a scribe, a farmer, a builder, a mother, or you were dead. Still, despite the hardships, Egyptians were not endlessly miserable. They believed in their gods, in their place in the universe, and in the beauty woven through existence. They enjoyed festivals, music, food, family, and laughter. They danced, they painted, they joked. They envisioned eternity so vividly that they carved stone monuments that outlast empires. But for someone today, stripped of your comforts, your air conditioning, your clean water, your shoes, your aspirin, your phone, you would crumble before the second sandstorm. So no, you wouldn't last a day. But they lasted thousands of years. And that perhaps is why we still speak of them. Now, shift with me across the ocean. In the center of ancient Teotihuacan, one pyramid refuses to fade from memory. Its facade is not graced by peaceful scenes of gods or harmony, but by rows of snarling serpents carved in stone mouths, wide fangs bared. This is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, later known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. But unlike most temples that point heavenward with reverence, this one radiates menace. From the moment you near it, you feel watched. These carved serpent heads are no simple adornment. They serve as warnings, marks of wrath, and under their gaze something dark once occurred. Excavations in the past decades unearthed not only ceremonial gifts, but something far more chilling: human remains. Not a handful, over 200. Many decapitated hands tied behind their backs. Most were young men, perhaps warriors arranged in precise groups, ritual sacrifices placed with deliberate care. Some bore obsidian blades. Others wore necklaces fashioned from human teeth or bone. These were not haphazard burials. They were messages, a covenant written in flesh and stone. This was not just a temple, but a theater of power where blood was the currency for cosmic order. What belief demanded such a price? The temple was more than architecture. It was a political stage, a fusion of religion, war, and intimidation that kept a city of more than 100,000 under control. Ritual bloodletting may have been their way of preserving balance in the universe. Standing before it now, staring at those reptilian faces, you're not just seeing sculpture. You're staring into the worldview of a people convinced the cosmos itself hungered. But who were they, who commanded such vast labor, such sacrifice, and then vanished without leaving their name? The city is called Teotihuacan. The name comes from the later Aztecs, who called it the place where gods were born. And when you walk its grand avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids clawing at the heavens, you begin to see why. At its peak, around the 1st to 3rd centuries of the Common Era, Teotihuacan swelled with more than 100,000 residents, ranking as one of the largest cities on Earth. It rivaled Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in size and sophistication. It was laid out with precision-wide avenues, gridded streets, apartment complexes, housing extended families, and multi-story stone structures. At the city's heart rose 3 vast monuments: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But the great mystery, we don't know who built it. To this day, the names of its people remain unknown. They left no written chronicles, no carved king lists. Teotihuacan seems to have been guided not by a single monarch, but perhaps by a council, a collective rule, or some form alien to our notions of kingship. Yet despite this anonymity, their influence radiated far. Evidence of their reach appears hundreds of miles away, from Maya cities like Tikal and Copan to Zapotec capitals such as Monte Alban. Their obsidian blades, painted ceramics, and vivid murals traveled widely. In some cases, Teotihuacan envoys may even have helped topple rulers to install allies more favorable to their power. So how did a city without a clear written language project such dominance across Mesoamerica? Perhaps the answer lies in how they merged cosmic vision with politics. Their temples weren't just houses of worship. They were instruments of authority aligned with the heavens' stages for sacrifice and symbols that declared to all who entered Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. It was imagined as the very pivot of existence, a sacred engine that kept time, destiny, and blood bound together. And at the center of this machinery stood the temple of the feathered serpent. To grasp the meaning of the temple, you first must understand the deity it honored, the feathered serpent. Centuries later, the Aztecs would call him Quetzalcoatl, while the Maya knew him as Kukulkan. In Teotihuacan, long before Aztec rule, he was already central, perhaps the supreme divine force. But here lies the paradox. What kind of god is both serpent and bird? Think on it. The serpent slithers low, associated with earth, darkness, death, and rebirth through the shedding of its skin. The bird soars into the heights, symbolizing freedom, the sun, breath, and divine vitality. To fuse these opposites, death with life, earth with sky, chaos with order, was to forge a being of terrifying cosmic power. The feathered serpent was no mere deity. He was a bridge, uniting realms. On the walls of the temple, carved in deep relief, dozens of his images stare back. Round eyes open, jaws, feathered crowns. Some scholars say these are the god himself. Others argue they depict priests or warriors wearing his regalia to show authority granted from above. Either way, their repetition covers the facade, as if the building itself was alive, inhaling and exhaling with divine breath. But the feathered serpent's role went further than celestial symbolism. He was inseparably linked to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that ensured the universe kept moving. And though later myths would soften Quetzalcoatl into a civilizing hero here in Teotihuacan, he bore a darker face. He demanded offerings far more than maize or incense. He required life itself. In certain traditions, he even descended into the underworld to gather bones, creating humankind. But life born from death always required a trade. The gods shed their essence for humanity, and humans repaid that debt in kind. Thus, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was no ordinary monument. It was a cosmic engine aligning the sky, the earth, and the underworld in one great circuit of ritual. Each sculpted serpent head, each layer of stone, each life offered, all formed part of this vast system. Teotihuacan didn't simply worship the feathered serpent. They enacted his paradox in stone and blood. For centuries, the temple brooded in silence, half buried by time, weathered yet imposing. Stories circulated, scholars guessed, but no one truly understood what lay beneath until excavations in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. What was uncovered wasn't merely surprising, it was chilling. Beneath the temple's base were chambers long sealed, each filled with carefully ordered human remains. These weren't casualties of war or victims of disease. They were sacrifices, deliberate, organized ritual. Over 200 young men, many between 15 and 25, were interred there. Some wore necklaces of human jawbones. Others lay with hands bound. A few had been decapitated. Nearby rested obsidian blades, black and razor-sharp, the unmistakable tools of sacrifice. And the burials weren't random. They were aligned in patterns set by quadrants and directions likely to mirror the cosmic order. Even the numbers mattered. It wasn't just about death, but about meaningful death. Surrounding the bodies were offerings, bones of jaguars, serpents, shells carried from the distant Gulf Coast, figurines, unused weapons of obsidian. These weren't punishments, these were gifts. The dead, likely warriors, weren't disgraced, but chosen, consecrated in blood, to raise the temple. The logic seemed almost architectural. A temple couldn't rise without blood. Every layer of stone needed consecration. The more you dug, the more sacrifices you found. In one hidden tunnel, archaeologists discovered mercury pools and glittering mica substances tied to visions of the underworld. The floor shimmered like water, perhaps a passage to the realm of the dead or a mirror of the heavens. It seemed the temple wasn't built atop death, it was built around it. The stone was designed to absorb blood, to hold it for the gods. Look closely at the structure and something else emerges. The temple doesn't just stand, it aligns. Teotihuacan itself was no random sprawl. The entire city follows a cosmic grid. Its main avenue of the dead runs 15 degrees off true north, deliberately angled perhaps toward the setting of the Pleiades or the sun at ritual dates. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent sits squarely on this axis, locking itself into a celestial design. Why, scholars debate. Some argue it aligns with equinox sunrise, others see it as tied to Venus, the planet sacred across Mesoamerica associated with war, death, and rebirth. Battles began when Venus rose. Sacrifices followed its path. Even the temple's steps may encode cosmic numbers like 7, the count of visible planets. Its rhythm and symmetry reflect an advanced grasp of astronomy and mathematics. And then beneath in 2003 came another revelation. Archaeologists uncovered a tunnel running deep under the temple, not a crude passage but a crafted underworld. Its walls, once coated with pyrite sparkling in lamplight like starlight, combined with mercury pools and mineral-coated chambers, the effect would have been otherworldly, a walk through the Milky Way itself, a symbolic descent to death and rebirth. This was no ordinary temple. It was a machine, a cosmic portal uniting earth, sky, and spirit. Teotihuacanos may have seen time as circular, not linear. Rituals, sacrifices, and monuments weren't single events, but links in an eternal cycle. Death fed life. Sacrifice fueled renewal. The temple's alignments may have helped track celestial rhythms, mark harvests, and dictate the sacred schedule of blood. It wasn't just gazing at stars, it was attempting to converse with them, yet the temple's role stretched beyond the spiritual. It was also a weapon of politics. Its architecture was designed to overwhelm, to terrify, to fix in every visitor's mind who controlled Teotihuacan. Imagine arriving 1800 years ago as a delegate from a smaller city. The Avenue of the Dead already staggers you with its scale, but when you reach this temple you stop cold. Dozens of serpent heads stare down, fangs bared. Jaguars snarl in stone. The vast plaza before you fills with people not only for festivals but for ritual executions staged under the sky. Here fear became authority. Leaders knew that nothing enforced loyalty like divine terror. Sacrifices weren't hidden, they were theatre. Priests in feathered crowns and obsidian masks chanted, danced, and shed blood in sight of thousands. It wasn't just a gift to the gods, but a performance proving rulers had the ear of heaven itself. They alone commanded reign, victory, and fate. The architecture amplified the message. From the upper tiers, rulers looked down over the crowd. The people looked upward toward gods, rulers, and victims, always reminded of their place. And outsiders carried the story away. Envoys returned home whispering of feathered serpents, endless boulevards and plazas stained with blood. Teotihuacan didn't need armies to conquer. It conquered with awe and terror. At its peak, the city was the pulse of Mesoamerica, fire and stone gods, and sacrifice seemingly eternal. But around 550 CE, something broke. The fall wasn't glorious. It was slow, then sudden. Signs of stress had been building, prolonged drought, crops failing, unrest simmering. The very systems that sustained Teotihuacan, its centralized authority, its sacred cosmic order, began to unravel. And then came flames. Archaeologists uncovered layers of burning across palaces, temples, and elite buildings. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent itself shows marks of destruction. The strange part, common neighborhoods were spared. This wasn't a foreign invasion, it was an uprising from within. Those who once stood awestruck before sacrifices may have risen against their priests and leaders. The temple that once embodied divine power was attacked, its sculptures defaced, its grandeur scarred. Fires raged, sacred courtyards were desecrated, and then came silence. Teotihuacan did not vanish overnight, but its essence withered away. The vast trade networks that once carried obsidian cacao and feathers across Mesoamerica collapsed. Artists ceased their work. Great rituals ended. The ruling elite dissolved into obscurity. The temple that had once thundered with cosmic authority no longer spoke. and yet its mystery only grew deeper. For though the city fell, its legend endured. Centuries later, when the Aztecs entered the Valley of Mexico, they came upon its monumental ruins. They were struck dumb with awe. Believing no mortals could have built such a place, they declared that gods themselves had raised it. They gave it a name still used today, Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They wove their own myths around its pyramids, treating the city as holy ground, even as they had no memory of the people who built it. For them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin but a relic, a remnant of divine truth. Yet the irony remains: the most powerful city of its age, erected on cosmic order and nourished by blood, vanished without leaving so much as a final inscription, a closing word. Only stone remains, asking questions without answers. It seemed the gods had gone silent. For over 1,000 years, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay hidden under dust, volcanic ash, and time. Farmers ploughed around it. Locals kept their distance. The world forgot until the rise of modern archaeology. In the early 20th century, Mexican researchers began uncovering Teotihuacan. What they found stunned them: a perfectly planned metropolis far older than the Aztecs. But the temple itself held its secrets tightly until the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Then came the revelations. In 2011, archaeologists breached a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been deliberately closed nearly 1,800 years earlier, as though to forbid intrusion. Excavations revealed a cosmic passageway, a symbolic underworld. The walls gleamed with powdered pyrite twinkling like stars. Pools of liquid mercury shimmered in the darkness like rivers of another realm. Thousands of objects lay carefully arranged: jade figurines, rubber balls, obsidian knives, carved wooden masks. It felt less like a tomb than a message across time. Why would the builders seal such a place? What truth did they mean to guard? Some scholars propose it was used in initiation ceremonies for rulers or priests. Others think it represented creation itself, a mythic womb where gods were born, where order was set between humans and the cosmos. Mercury, now considered poisonous, may have symbolized water, or the shimmering veil between life and death. And among all this, the serpent lingered, not gone, but coiled deep within stone, whispering through murals, carvings, and geometry. The feathered serpent had not vanished. He had only retreated inward, waiting to be found. Every excavation, every jawbone and ornament unearthed brought us closer to his meaning, a message carved not in script but in sacrifice, shadow, and stone. Even now, with ground-penetrating radar drones and X-rays, the truth resists us. The temple still keeps its secrets. Today it rises as a haunting monument not just to a lost civilization but to a worldview that merged cosmos, authority, and blood into one. Tourists snap photos. Children dart past serpent heads. Yet beneath their feet lies soil soaked in stories, over 200 known sacrifices and countless others untold. Still, the temple endures. Its influence isn't merely architectural, it is psychological, cultural, spiritual. The feathered serpent himself continued to evolve. Adopted by the Toltecs, later reborn among the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, his myth softened into something gentler. He became the bringer of knowledge, the god who pitied humanity, the one who promised to return. Myths do not die, they transform. Even today in Mexico, his echoes linger in murals, literature, public art, even the nation's identity. His likeness has appeared on coins, stamps, and government buildings, a symbol of pre-Columbian brilliance and mystery. But another legacy remains darker, less comfortable. The temple confronts us with the price of belief. How far will humans go to touch the divine? What occurs when power and faith blur into one? Can magnificence coexist with horror? The Temple of the Feathered Serpent is not merely archaeology, it is a mirror. It reflects our longing for eternity, our hunger for meaning, and our dual capacity to create wonders and stain them with blood. It teaches us that greatness always casts shadows, that civilizations can soar to heights unimaginable even as they bury their secrets beneath stone. Perhaps this is why we keep returning not simply as tourists, but as seekers, because deep down we know the serpent still watches, not to strike, but to remind us of what we once were and what we might yet become. But before there was writing, before there were cities or temples, there was rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before alphabets or spoken language, humans made sound with intent. Not words, not melody, but beat. A palm striking hollow bark, a stick tapping stone, a foot stomping earth in time. From repetition came something transcendent, the first drum beat. It wasn't called music, it wasn't named at all, but it felt like meaning, like movement, like emotion taking form. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of percussion tools over 30,000 years old. Rough trunks, hollow gourds, stretched hides, crude, perishable, yet powerful. These instruments were not mere playthings. They warned, they summoned, they united. Picture a scattered tribe, a drum beat from the distance, danger approaches or celebration begins or the gods listen. Early drums were extensions of the human body, an external heartbeat reverberating across valleys. They weren't played for audiences. They were lived together around fire under night skies in caves where echoes turned air into vibration. Rhythm became a language of feeling, joy, grief, warning, hope, spoken not in syllables but in patterns. Before flutes or lyres, there was the drum anchoring time, guiding rituals, binding people into tribes. Everywhere on earth, people built something to strike, something to sound. Even without words, rhythm was already ours. Drums became sacred. Each culture gave them spirit. In Africa, some of the earliest drums held profound meaning. The djembe, carved from one tree trunk and covered with goatskin, embodied three souls: the tree, the animal, and the craftsman. Played in circles, it wasn't accompaniment, it was the ritual itself. Talking drums mimicked speech, carrying news, warnings, and announcements across miles. Long before telephones, humans drummed their messages through forests and hills. Across the oceans, native peoples of the Americas saw drums as living beings, the heartbeat of Mother Earth. The great powwow drum encircled by players was both musical and spiritual. In Australia, Aboriginal people used clapsticks and stomping in the dreamtime, recreating the birth of the world. In the Arctic Inuit, shamans struck frame drums to fall into trance, to seek visions during endless winter nights. These weren't concerts, they were survival, prayer, memory, and community. To drum was to belong, to drum was to remember, and always it was collective. Drums gathered people into circles, uniting their breath and pulse. There was no sheet music, no stage, only hands moving, hearts synchronizing, souls stirring. It didn't matter where you were. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was unfolding, something beyond words. As civilizations grew, drums shifted from sacred circles to battlefields. They spoke not only comfort but command. Kingdoms turned drums into tools of control, instruments of order, weapons of fear. Early armies had no radios, no horns. They had drums. In ancient China, massive war drums called bo coordinated troops across vast plains. A single strike ordered advance, retreat, or encirclement. Each rhythm had meaning, carrying through chaos. In Mesopotamia, temple drums announced rulers, summoned citizens, and in wartime shook city walls with booming terror. Rome carried frame drums in rituals, processions, and cult ceremonies. While not always used in battle like horns, their sound still signified empire, order, discipline. But no army used drums like the Ottomans. Their meta bands, the earliest known military orchestras, unleashed storms of percussion and brass before combat. The pounding of great kettle drums and double-headed davul thundered across fields, freezing enemies in fear before the first clash of swords. European chroniclers tell of soldiers rooted in place, paralyzed not by steel but by sound. Drums were never just for battlefields. Long before cannons and rifles, the deep roll of percussion proclaimed power in royal courts across Asia, Africa, and Europe. When kings or emperors entered their halls, drum ensembles thundered to announce presence. When a crown was placed on a ruler's head, the low boom gave weight to the ritual. In palaces and ceremonies, a drum beat was less music than proclamation. It said, "Without words, power is here. It is alive. It is unshakable." Even far from thrones, in the most oppressed corners of history, drums still pulsed with defiance. Enslaved Africans brought to the Americas carried rhythms in memory, in body, in bone. On plantations, drums kept culture alive, encoded messages, and sometimes coordinated uprisings. Colonial powers often banned drumming because they feared its potential. Yet still the instrument endured, beating quietly on overturned barrels, clapped hands, or whispered through feet. Even under bondage, the drum refused silence. Whether in royal processions or secret gatherings under the stars, the message was always the same. This is identity. This is defiance. This is the rhythm of power. As societies spread across continents, their rhythms branched like great rivers, changing form and purpose. In the East, percussion became a language of ceremony, devotion, and precision. In the West, drums leaned toward discipline, military command, and later the grandeur of orchestras. Two worlds, two paths, one heartbeat. In India, drumming became not merely performance but sacred dialogue. The tabla, with its sharp resonance and liquid grace, emerged as a central voice in classical music and devotional art. To learn tabla was not only to practice technique but to master a vocabulary. Each strike carried a syllable, a coded meaning, a linguistic shape. Tabla masters trained for decades, treating rhythm like poetry. They were not simply musicians, but linguists of sound conversing in patterns passed through centuries. Meanwhile, Japan gave rise to the mighty taiko, a drum so immense and commanding that it shaped theater, warfare, and worship alike. To play taiko required a body like a warrior's, wide stances, forceful strikes, controlled breathing. A taiko performance was choreography as much as music, every movement deliberate and martial. At festivals, the earth itself seemed to shake with the resonance echoing through valleys believed to drive out demons and invite gods to descend. In Indonesia, the kendang drum guided the shimmering tide of gamelan orchestras. Where bronze gongs rippled and flutes wove, it was the kendang that steered dancers and musicians alike. Its rhythms, layered and cyclical, mirrored cosmic harmony. In these temples, percussion was not just accompaniment, it was a spiritual compass aligning humanity with the universe. Europe told another story. In medieval times, drums were instruments of command and order. They told armies when to march, warned of attack, and set tempo for disciplined movement. Centuries passed before drums were welcomed into the refined halls of Renaissance and Baroque music. Even then, they remained distant, more thunder than melody, echoing behind choirs and coronations. Where the East tied rhythm to meditation and breath, the West often tied it to control. Yet both agreed on the essential truth: to beat a drum is to shape time itself, to carve order from chaos, to connect voices beyond speech. From high mountains to candlelit cathedrals, from desert fires to palace halls, drums accompanied humanity's meeting with the divine. Long before scriptures, rhythm itself was prayer. Across Africa, drums were not inanimate wood and skin, but spiritual beings. In Yoruba practice, the bata drum spoke to orishas, the deities, and ancestral spirits. Drummers were not entertainers, but priests. Each sequence of tones carried intention, summons, blessing, offering. Played correctly, rhythms invited gods to dance among mortals. Every pattern had a role, every vibration a sacred direction. In Hindu traditions, percussion appears in the hands of gods themselves. The god Shiva as Nataraja dances the cosmic dance of creation and destruction, holding the tiny hourglass-shaped damaru. Its beat is no ordinary rhythm, it is the pulse of the universe, the vibration that turns silence into sound, void into form. In Buddhism, soft frame drums accompany chants. A slow, steady pulse guides monks' breathing, reminding them to return to presence again and again. These drums are not forceful, they are metronomes of the soul. Across the Americas, indigenous peoples used drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The rhythm was constant, steady, echoing the mother's womb, helping seekers enter trances or commune with ancestors. In such circles, the drum was not beside prayer, it was the prayer. Even in Christianity, where rhythm was often subdued, percussion found a voice. In African American churches, gospel traditions made drums into instruments of praise and power. Behind choirs, they throbbed like a second heart, embodying both faith and struggle. When words faltered, rhythm carried devotion. Every faith, every ritual, every path to the divine seemed to keep one truth: rhythm is energy in motion. The drum is not decoration, but vessel channeling the mysteries language cannot touch. For millennia, drums were singular, a single body, a single sound, one purpose. That changed with the industrial age. As factories roared and theaters grew crowded, percussion was reimagined. By the early 1900s, instead of scattering bass, snare, cymbals, and woodblocks across a stage with multiple performers, musicians began combining them into one playable setup. In 1909, the bass drum pedal was patented, freeing hands while the foot struck. One drummer could now do the work of many. Thus, the drum kit was born. In the smoky clubs of New Orleans and Chicago, the kit found its soul. Jazz musicians turned it into more than a metronome. They spoke through it with swing, syncopation, and subtlety. Drummers like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich elevated percussion into a lead voice. Rhythm became storytelling. By the 1962nd and 72nd, the kit thundered into rock. John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed drums to extremes of speed, endurance, and inventiveness. With expanding toms, double pedals, and crashing cymbals, the drummer was no longer in the shadows. They were the engine of the band. Today, kits exist everywhere in gospel churches, punk garages, EDM stages, global tours. Even as digital pads and drum machines rise, the tactile sweat and stick of a live set remain irreplaceable. But the drum story is not one instrument, it is thousands. Each culture molded rhythm into its own signature. In West Africa, the djembe became a community's heartbeat, capable of sharp slaps, round tones, and deep bass. The talking drum, the doon-doon, literally imitated speech, bending pitch to mimic human language. Drumming here was conversation, a dialogue between living ancestors and spirits. In the Middle East, the darbuka, a goblet drum made of clay or metal, spoke with crisp clarity, essential to belly dance and classical Arabic traditions. Its sound was sharp, demanding both precision and movement. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, percussion revealed fusion. Bongos, congas, and timbales reflected African roots entwined with indigenous and Spanish threads. In Cuba, sacred bata drums spoke divine languages. In Santeria rituals, each drum teed to specific gods. In Brazil, surdo and cuica thundered through samba parades, propelling carnival with rhythms equal parts prayer, protest, and ecstasy. In India, the mridangam in the south and tabla in the north blurred rhythm into melody, their precise tuning making percussion sing like voice. In Europe, frame drums carried ancient memory from the Persian daf to the Irish bodhran. Played with fingers, sticks, or brushes, they reminded us that simplicity can be sacred. Though the forms vary, the essence is shared. Drums carry identity. They are cultural fingerprints etched in sound, crafted from local wood, skin, or clay, carrying geography and memory in every strike. By the late 20th century, a new chapter opened. Drums were no longer confined to skins and sticks. Circuits, pads, and software joined the family. The first drum machines in the 1972nd were crude, their beats, stiff, robotic. Yet musicians saw possibility, precision, repeatability, control. Then, in 1980, the Roland TR-808 was released. Its booming bass and crisp snares became iconic, birthing whole genres: hip-hop, techno, electro-trap. These weren't imitations of acoustic drums. They were new voices altogether. Soon, electronic kits allowed natural play with infinite sounds. A drummer could practice silently, record without microphones, and swap tones at a button's press. Digital audio workstations, Ableton FL Studio Logic, expanded rhythm into boundless realms. Drums became not only instruments, but tools of creation itself, merging tradition with innovation. From hollow logs in prehistoric forests to silicon chips in modern studios, one thread runs constant: the drum is humanity's heartbeat. It speaks of power, of worship, of rebellion, of joy. It is our first language and perhaps our last. Because wherever humans gather in war, in prayer, in dance, in mourning, there is rhythm. And as long as hearts beat, so too will drums. With the arrival of the computer, age rhythm escaped the confines of wood and skin and entered the world of circuits and code. Suddenly, anyone with nothing more than a laptop could construct vast percussive landscapes. Kicks, snares, hi-hats and sub-bass tones could be stacked like bricks, forming towering soundscapes. What once demanded orchestras of musicians could now be achieved with a few clicks, loops and samples. Out of this freedom grew finger drumming, the art of tapping out beats on glowing MIDI pads, turning the fingertips themselves into miniature drumsticks. Some people worried that this digital tide would drown the human pulse, replacing feel with flawless but lifeless precision. But that prediction proved wrong. What followed instead was fusion. Traditional drummers began attaching electronic triggers to their acoustic kits, letting a single strike call forth both the warmth of stretched hide and the bite of a digital sample. Producers experimented in the other direction, overlaying programmed beats with recordings of live drumming to bring back unpredictability, swing, and breath. Rather than erasing the past, digital drums offered a chance to reinterpret it. Today, a solitary creator sitting in a small bedroom can weave rhythms that once required dozens of performers. Ancient grooves from Africa, Asia, and the Americas are captured, sampled, reshaped, and reborn on neon-lit dance floors. The tools changed, but the function never did: to set bodies in motion, to sculpt the passage of time, to give silence a voice. Across every empire and every age, one fact has remained steady. The drum is humanity's first and most enduring voice. From fireside circles to echoing concert halls, from sacred rites to festival stages, rhythm has always been more than entertainment. It is connection. It ties us to ourselves, to the people around us, and to something that feels larger than either. The heartbeat is not a metaphor, it is the first rhythm we all encounter. In the womb, before breath, before language, we hear the steady thrum of our mother's heart. Safe, unbroken, alive. When life begins, we never stop seeking that pulse. Through triumphs and disasters, the drum has stood beside us. It has marched at the side of kings and thundered in the hands of rebels. It has carried prayers through temples and rattled through subway tunnels. Its language needs no translation because it bypasses words, reaching straight into bones and blood. When we mourn, we strike it softly to honor loss. When we celebrate, we drive it hard to express joy. And in the spaces between grief and ecstasy, rhythm reminds us of identity, anchoring memory and presence. Even now, percussion refuses to sit still. Street performers coax ethereal tones from steel handpans on bustling corners. Indigenous nations fight to protect ceremonies where ancient drumming traditions beat back centuries of erasure. At sports arenas, massive bass drums synchronize tens of thousands of fans into a single roaring body. Children long before training bang pots and pans with sheer instinctual delight. Technology has joined in too. Even artificial intelligence is learning how to generate rhythm. Yet no code can reproduce the subtle humanity of a slightly imperfect beat. Because rhythm is not merely counted, it is felt. That tension between precision and emotion is what keeps the drum alive long after empires fade and fashions change. Perhaps that is why rhythm persists, because underneath everything, people crave a shared pulse, a temporal anchor that says we are here together right now. However advanced our tools become, however much experience shifts into the virtual, there will always be something grounding about hand on wood, stick on skin, breath, guiding tempo. A beat, a moment, a beginning. The drum is not an artifact of some primitive past. It is proof that we were always meant to move in rhythm, to listen, to join. And as long as humans exist, the drum will never vanish into silence. Shift scenes now. Before Manhattan became the vertical forest of glass and steel we recognize today, it was a humbler island. Instead of skyscrapers, church steeples and pitched rooftops drew the longest shadows. At the dawn of the 1802nd, the skyline barely scraped the clouds. The young city crowded around the southern tip of the island, a knot of brick row houses, timber-framed shops and dirt-packed streets. Few buildings rose higher than 5 or 6 stories. This wasn't due to a lack of imagination, but to the limits of physics. The taller a structure climbed, the heavier it pressed downward. With brick and stone as the main tools, going high demanded walls so thick at the base that interior space vanished and foundations ballooned in cost. So, for decades, New York grew outward instead of upward, stretching north along a rational grid mapped out in 1811, one of the most ambitious urban designs of its age. Yet hidden beneath cobblestones and soil lay a secret Manhattan's granite backbone, a deep and unyielding bedrock. Quiet for centuries, this rock would eventually carry some of the tallest towers in human history, but in those early years it waited in silence. Life in the growing port was busy but earthbound. The harbour bristled with sails, docks overflowed with cargo, and horses clattered across narrow lanes. Immigrants poured in, businesses flourished, and the city pulsed with restless energy. Yet the sky remained mostly untouched. The tallest markers were churches, and Trinity Church, completed in 1846, dominated the horizon with a spire reaching over 280 feet. For decades, this was the loftiest point in Manhattan, more a symbol of faith than a skyline. No one yet realized that the future profile of the city would be carved not from stone and timber, but from steel and vision. For generations, gravity dictated architecture, keeping ambition flat. But in the middle of the 19th century, 2 inventions rewrote the rules of height. One carried people, the other carried buildings. In 1852, Elisha Otis unveiled his revolutionary safety elevator at the New York Crystal Palace exhibition. Standing atop a platform suspended in the air, he ordered the rope cut. Onlookers gasped as the platform stopped dead, held by an automatic safety catch. In one dramatic gesture, Otis made the upper floors of buildings desirable. Until then, top stories were the cheapest rooms. No one wanted to climb endless stairs. But once elevators became secure, the highest levels became prestigious, offering light breezes and sweeping views. Still, lifting people was only half the equation. Walls of stone and brick remained stubbornly heavy. That obstacle cracked in the 1882nd and 1892nd with the adoption of the steel skeleton. Engineers discovered that a steel frame could bear a building's weight, allowing the outer walls to become thin curtains instead of thick, load-bearing masses. This method, known as steel frame construction, liberated architecture. Now, height was limited only by the strength of steel and the daring of the designer. With elevators making altitude practical and steel frames making it possible, Manhattan became the perfect stage for vertical ambition. The island's compact geography forced efficiency, while its rising role as a financial hub meant banks, insurers, and publishers all clamored for headquarters that would pierce the clouds. The elevator opened the sky to human traffic. The steel skeleton made that sky buildable. Together, they didn't just change construction, they reinvented what a city could become. By the final years of the 19th century, New York no longer dreamed of spreading across flat ground. It dreamed of soaring. Streets and plots were full. The only direction left was upward. The race to the sky began in earnest. In 1890, Joseph Pulitzer's New York World Building rose 20 stories above Park Row, briefly the tallest office building on the planet. Competition followed quickly. The Park Row building claimed the crown in 1899, standing at 391 feet. Each new tower was not just a workplace, but a proclamation: we represent the future. In the early 20th century, the skyline erupted. The Singer Building, completed in 1908, stretched 612 feet, the first structure to overshadow Trinity's spire that had reigned supreme for more than half a century. Yet even that triumph was short-lived. By 1913, the Woolworth Building shattered records, climbing to 792 feet across 55 stories. Designed by Cass Gilbert and financed entirely in cash by retail tycoon Frank W. Woolworth, the skyscraper was christened the Cathedral of Commerce. Its neo-Gothic arches and pinnacles weren't just functional, they were sermon and spectacle, broadcasting America's arrival as an industrial power. But the battle for height wasn't only about engineering, it was branding on a colossal scale. Corporations sought to stamp their names into the very sky. Each record-breaking tower was both a corporate logo and a civic statement. Every rise made headlines. Every silhouette redrew the identity of the city. What had begun as necessity became competition, and what started as competition became obsession. The skyscraper became the city's loudest advertisement, towering, permanent, impossible to ignore. And while people craned their necks at the skyline, the heartbeat of progress pounded below. Steam shovels tore into granite foundations, riveters hammered steel with endless rhythm, and immigrant laborers in flat caps balanced on beams hundreds of feet in the air. They had no harnesses, no nets, just nerve grit and steady hands. The skyline was no longer a dream. It was muscle and sweat, fire and steel growing higher each week. As the 1,922nd roared through Manhattan, height alone wasn't enough. The city wanted spectacle. This was the age of Art Deco, when buildings carried not only ambition but elegance. The Jazz Age danced through architecture, infusing towers with geometric patterns, bright facades, and the glamour of modern motion. Nothing embodied that spirit more than the Chrysler Building. Completed in 1930, it briefly reigned as the tallest building in the world, its peak reaching 1,046 feet into the clouds. Commissioned by automobile magnate Walter Chrysler, it wasn't simply an office block, it was sculpture in steel. The famous stainless steel crown, secretly assembled and then hoisted into place almost overnight, glittered like a crown of the future. Ornamental eagles modeled after hood ornaments jutted out at the corners as if to launch the whole structure forward. Its sleek arcs and chevron patterns made it feel less like a building and more like a machine dream brought to life. The Chrysler didn't just reach for the sky, it flirted with it. But glory in New York was always temporary. Just a year later, a new colossus rose a few blocks away. The Empire State Building, finished in 1931, soared to 1,250 feet, eclipsing Chrysler's record and holding the crown for nearly 4 decades. Built in the middle of the Great Depression, it was more than steel and limestone. It was a proclamation: New York will not collapse. In just 410 days, thousands of men braved wind, snow, and steel dust to complete what would become the most iconic skyscraper in the world. The Empire State wasn't merely architecture, it was resilience carved into stone. Where other cities slowed, Manhattan surged upward. These Art Deco towers carried contradictions. They were glamorous yet aggressive, streamlined yet mythical. At night they lit the sky like electric cathedrals, glowing testaments to possibility. But behind the ornament, behind the symmetry and spires, was a deeper hunger. Wealthy industrialists and media titans weren't just competing for tenants. They were competing for immortality, carving their legacies into the horizon. By the end of the 1,932nd, Manhattan had a silhouette recognizable the world over. It was no longer just a financial capital, it had become a monument to ambition itself. A skyline that didn't suggest progress but shouted it across the oceans. After the Second World War, however, the skyline's style shifted. The ornate age of Art Deco gave way to something cooler, sharper, more corporate. The United States had emerged as the dominant global superpower, and New York became the command center of that empire. Architecture followed suit, not with gleaming crowns and Gothic flourishes, but with hard glass and perfect grids. The turning point came in 1952, when the United Nations headquarters rose along the East River. Its austere glass tower, flanked by low marble wings, was more than a workplace. It was an architectural declaration of global unity and diplomacy in the nuclear age, a futuristic vision stripped of nostalgia, setting the template for what followed. The Lever House appeared soon after in 1952 with a sheer curtain wall of glass hovering above a ground-level plaza. The Seagram building followed in 1958, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, a master of the international style. Its bronze-tinted glass facade and strict steel grid represented discipline distilled into architecture. These new towers weren't designed to awe with ornament. They projected efficiency, clarity, and above all, authority. This was corporate New York rising block by block. Midtown filled with mirrored slabs housing banks, law firms, advertising agencies, and media empires. Skyscrapers now competed less for beauty and more for presence, square footage, and location. Their mirrored facades reflected the clouds, but also mirrored the ambitions of Wall Street and Madison Avenue. Gone were gargoyles and spires. In their place stood monoliths of precision and restraint. In their silence, though, they still spoke loudly of a nation devoted to growth, order, and modernity. By the end of the 1962nd, New York was already a vertical masterpiece. Yet the city's imagination was not exhausted. At the southern tip of Manhattan, a bold new dream was taking form. The World Trade Center, two identical towers that would forever change the skyline. Commissioned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, the towers were designed by architect Minoru Yamasaki. His radical minimalist approach rejected setbacks and ornament. Instead, he envisioned two sheer walls of vertical lines clad in aluminum soaring over 1,600 feet. They would dwarf anything that had come before. The ambition was not merely architectural but ideological, a vision of global commerce unified in a single hub. Construction began in 1966. To prepare the site, engineers demolished an entire neighborhood, Radio Row. They pioneered the slurry wall method to carve foundations deep into the riverbed while holding back the Hudson River. It was one of the boldest feats of civil engineering ever attempted. When completed in 1973, the Twin Towers were not universally loved. Some critics saw them as bland or boxy, lamenting the loss of ornamented skyscrapers. But to many, their presence was undeniable, bold, uncompromising, monumental. They didn't taper like the Empire State or sparkle like the Chrysler. They stood like twin sentinels, unyielding and certain. The World Trade Center quickly transcended architecture. It became an icon of American capitalism and unity. Tourists from every continent flocked to its observation decks. Dining at windows on the world became a once-in-a-lifetime experience. For nearly 3 decades, the Twin Towers defined Lower Manhattan, anchoring the skyline with their symmetrical power. While taller structures rose elsewhere, none carried the same symbolic gravity. But on the morning of the 11th of September 2001, the Manhattan skyline changed in a way no blueprint could predict. The towers collapsed in less than 2 hours, brought down not by age or engineering failure, but by deliberate violence. Thousands of lives were lost. The 2 pillars that had once embodied New York's confidence vanished into ash and twisted steel. The attack targeted more than buildings. It struck the symbols themselves: commerce, globalization, ambition, freedom. For decades, the Twin Towers had been shorthand for New York City, instantly recognizable in movies, photographs, and postcards. Their sudden absence left the skyline broken hollow. Where they once stood, only smoke and silence remained. Ground Zero became a scar in the heart of the city. For the first time in more than a century, Manhattan was not reaching upward, it was grieving. The familiar clang of iron was replaced by the quiet labor of recovery. Firefighters, police officers, steelworkers, and volunteers combed through rubble, searching, honoring, healing. New York, a city addicted to motion, was forced to pause, and yet even in mourning its gaze slowly lifted again. The question was painful, almost impossible. What should rise? Where the towers had fallen, could the skyline be remade without erasing memory? For years, the site remained an open wound, sacred ground marked by absence rather than presence. But the city is nothing if not resilient. Gradually, plans emerged. Competitions were held, arguments raged, and blueprints were redrawn. In 2003, architect Daniel Libeskin's vision was chosen to guide the rebirth of the site. His design balanced ambition with remembrance. Commercial towers would return, but so too would gardens, memorial pools, and spaces for reflection. The goal wasn't to replace what was lost, but to weave memory into the new skyline. The Manhattan skyline had always been a story of ambition, first with churches, then Art Deco towers, then glass monoliths. After the 11th of September, it became something more. It was no longer just a monument to wealth or technology. It became a living memorial, a horizon shaped by both triumph and tragedy. And in that mixture of grief and hope, the city found its rhythm again. Cranes reappeared, steel beams rose once more. The skyline that had been shattered began to heal, carrying forward the story of New York, resilient, unbowed, forever reaching upward. It stood as more than a building. It was a declaration of what could rise from devastation. At the center of the rebuilt skyline stood a new giant One World Trade Center, first called the Freedom Tower. From the northwest corner of Ground Zero, it stretched upward to 1,776 feet a height, chosen deliberately to recall the year of American independence. Every inch of it was meant to signal resilience, memory, and defiance against despair. This tower was not only a patriotic gesture, it embodied the will to keep building, to reach for the sky once more in the aftermath of loss. Work began in 2006. And after years of effort in 2014, its glass doors finally opened. Sheathed in reflective panes and rising like a crystalline obelisk, the building did not attempt to mimic what was gone. Instead, it created a new identity. The tower reflects the city and the sky, glowing in the morning, vanishing in clouds, and shimmering in twilight. Its power lies in its quietness, presence without arrogance, form without imitation. Beside it, the 9/11's memorial opened to the public in 2011. Two immense voids mark the footprints of the fallen towers, their waterfalls flowing endlessly into depths that can never be filled. Around them, bronze panels carry the names of those lost. These memorial pools are not just part of New York's architecture, they have become part of its soul spaces where grief, remembrance, and resilience converge. Over the years, the site filled in with new structures. 3 World Trade Center, 4 World Trade Center, and 7 World Trade Center each took their place. Sleek, modern, and deliberate in design, together they represent something beyond mere replacement. They stand as a city transformed, honoring memory while shaping the future. New York did not simply rebuild, it reinvented itself, showing that progress can grow from tragedy. The message the skyline now carries is both American and universal. A city can be brought low, but it will rise again. Today, when people see Manhattan's jagged horizon, they see more than towers. They see ambition, resilience, and the constant push of human possibility. The silhouette is so iconic that a few simple strokes on paper can evoke it instantly. It has become one of the most recognizable outlines in the world. That outline tells stories of engineers who dared, of ironworkers who balanced on beams against the wind, of architects who dreamed spires into existence, of immigrants whose labor lifted steel into the clouds. The skyline speaks of risk and reward, of reinvention and reinvestment. It reflects the restless churn of New York, a city that never considers itself complete. And even now it continues to evolve. In recent years, the race skyward shifted north. Along Billionaires Row near Central Park, ultra-slender residential towers have redefined height. Buildings like 432 Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, and 111 West 57th Street pierce the clouds with needle-like forms. Their engineering is extreme: narrow cores, wind-resistant dampers, walls of glass as fragile seeming as they are strong. To some, they are symbols of inequality, homes for the ultra-wealthy. To others, they are miracles of ambition, the latest expression of what engineering and wealth can create when combined. Farther west, a different vision rose. Hudson Yards transformed a vast rail yard into an entirely new neighborhood. Now gleaming towers, glass canyons, and public art stand there, an expansion of the skyline into territory once industrial. Corporate headquarters and luxury apartments define the space, reflecting the city's shifting balance of power and desire. Yet amid all this growth, the skyline holds on to its memory. The Empire State Building still glows each night, a lantern above Midtown. The Chrysler Building still greets the morning sun with its silver crown. And One World Trade Center remains a solemn sentinel, both a beacon of renewal and a monument to loss. This balance between old and new, between tragedy and triumph, is what gives Manhattan its singular power. More than statues or monuments, it is the skyline that defines New York. It is a record of humanity's determination to climb higher, built through prosperity and through hardship, through wars, crashes, and calamities. Each tower is not just steel and stone, but testimony to the millions who imagined and labored. The Manhattan skyline is not static. It breathes, it shifts, it grows. It does not mark the edge of the city, but the beginning of possibility. Because in New York, the sky is never the limit. It is only the next floor.